Welcome to the second iteration of Pragati Vichar Literature Festival organized by Frontlist Media. This year's overall theme is Taking Humanity Forward, and the sub-session theme is History and Mythology. And the session topic is Complexities of Historical Origins. We have three panelists for this session. First one is Anand Neelakantan, and the second one is Changez Jan Sir, and the third one is Tarana Husain Khan ma'am. I'm going to introduce them to all my audience. So Changez Salim Jan has a BSc degree in economics from the London School of Economics. Since then, he has mostly worked in the banking industry from 1994 onwards in Pakistan and Singapore. Apart from a brief stint as a lecturer in economics at the Berkeley, Changez Sir is not a trained historian, but his passion for the history of the subcontinent stems from his family. His great-grandfather was Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, also known as the Frontier Gandhi, who played a key role in the Indian freedom movement alongside several other leaders. And he has recently written a book called Forgotten Kings, the story of the Hindu Shahi dynasty. And it was released in July 2022 only. And the second panelist of today's session is Tarana Husain Khan ma'am. And we have also did one author interview also with her. So Dr. Tarana Husain Khan is a writer and cultural historian. She is the author of historical fiction, The Begum and the Dastan, which won the Kalinga Literary Award for fiction and was shortlisted for Women Writers Award by She the People and longlisted for Arthur Award. She is currently working on a research fellowship at the University of Sheffield for an Arts and Humanities Research Council funded project Forgotten Food, Culinary Memory, Local Heritage and Lost Agricultural Varieties in India. Her book name is, which I've also mentioned earlier also, The Begum and the Dastan, and it was released in 2021. And we have Anand Neelakantan sir as well. Anand Neelakantan sir is the author of the Bahubali trilogy, the prequel to S.S. Rajamouli's blockbuster movie. Neelakantan is also the author of Asura, which told the Ramayana from Ravan's point of view. He followed it up with a tremendously successful Ajay series. Neelakantan's books have been translated into more than 9 languages, including Indonesian. Neelakantan sir is also a prolific writer in Malayalam. He is also a cartoonist. And his book is Valmiki's Women, 5 Tales from Ramayana, which was released in 2021 July. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hello, hi.
So great to be with such great personalities on this show.
It's our pleasure, my pleasure, ma'am.
Welcome, everybody. So, moving forward, my first question is for Changez sir. So, when it comes to portraying historical facts in fictional and factual stories, we need to be more cautious and think of ourselves as readers. How can we make history easy for readers to understand?
So, when I was writing my book, actually, my intention wasn't to write. My intention first was to read. But then I found most of the books on the topic were very, very dull, and they were not very well written. My experience is a lot of Eastern writers, not only do they write the book, but they express and they tell you how you should feel about a certain character, that this character was very, very good, this character was very, very bad. They don't let you make up your mind by yourself. So when I wrote the book, actually, I was writing the book in a way that I would want to read it, rather than. So when I went out, and I think one thing for me is that the flow has to be very, very easy. So, no surprises from the beginning to the end. The flow should be a straight line, one thing after the other. especially for history, because it can be very confusing. There's a lot of dates, there's a lot of names involved. The second thing I noticed is about the names, because I had to rewrite my book once or twice. Having too many names in a book actually confuses the person, the reader. So I think the pertinent names are very, very important. Having extra names and describing maybe will confuse the reader a bit, because they might think this person is a very important part of the story, but then they'll find out actually that maybe not as relevant as before. So when writing, I think it's very important to just write about the key parts. The last thing I felt is when you're writing history, there is just so much history to write. It's very easy to go off topic and start writing about subtopics. So you have to be very disciplined not to go about and just stick to the main topic that you started talking about. So I think that sort of self-discipline also is very, very important when writing. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Okay, yes, sir. Actually, and I want to add something, and I want to ask you, has it ever happened to you whenever you have written something and then you read it again and then it just changes your mind to just write it again in some other context just because it I mean, you've also told that you also like to, what do you call, like a spoon feed maybe to reader so that it just is very simple and it does not confuse anybody.
So, two parts of the question. The first part, when you mentioned about rewriting, for sure I've rewritten. When I was writing my book, Forgotten Kings, I started writing it as a historical fiction. I wanted to have dialogue between people, but then I felt for that you need much more research, because if you want to be a character, then you need to basically understand the cultural aspects, how that person's religion and culture. So that information was lacking, and I also don't want to be naive, coming up with my own sort of. So then I stopped the historical fiction part, and I just went for pure history. So I wrote it, one time. Then when I read it once, I also don't want to be very naive or make statements, generic statements. So while you do want to spoon feed the reader in terms of giving them information, you don't want to treat them like a child and tell them how they should feel and how they should think. I think the important thing is to treat them like intelligent people. You give them the facts. You give them, what you feel is the right thing to share. Then let them come up with their own ideas as to how to assess the story. Everyone will have a different opinion, and I think sometimes as a reader, I feel insulted if people tell me how I should think about someone, that this king was a great king and this other king is a very, very bad king. I mean, let me make up my mind for myself. So I think the second part is very important, that you respect the reader, that he should have his own mind and think for himself.
Agree, sir. Okay, so Anand sir, in the book Valmiki's Woman, you illustrated what role women played in the epic tale of Ramayana. How did you come across the notion of composing this book in the first place?
See, thank you for the privilege of calling me here. I'm sorry, I'm really privileged to be here. I am not a historian. I'm a storyteller. So I think I'm sitting with historians. Both of them are eminent historians or historical fiction writers. I work in the realms of mythology and fiction based on that. So for me, the characters is important, the dates. So I don't have the scholarship to be a historian. For me, it is getting into the minds of the character and viewing the same story from their sides. So that's what I've been doing, for whether it is Ramayana or Mahabharata or other tales which I have told. Pure fiction perhaps was Bahubali. Other than that, all other books have been seeing the epics through the eyes of different characters. So Valmiki's Women was a part of the series where I started with Ravana, then I went to Bali, then for the women characters in Ramayana, especially the marginalized women like Shurpanaka, Tataka, Mithaka. So you get a different perspective of the same epic. So that's what I did there.
And I want to ask one thing also, sir. As I was reading the reviews also on Amazon and on Goodreads about your book, one of the customer or a reader, she has mentioned that you have mentioned Surpanakha in your book, and you've written from her perspective. Actually, everybody who has read or who has watched Ramayan, she was a bad influence, and she was considered under Rakshas, Rakshas, whatever you call a field. So, is it like a bad thing because you've also like completely changed the perspective regarding Surpanakha in your book? Because everybody from their childhood, they have heard that Surpanakha came from a Rakshas background, so she was a bad woman or she was considered negative. So what do you want to call? What do you want
So
to?
I think there is no concept of negative or positive, especially in the old Indian tales, which is a later day construct actually. We have, so I didn't grow up hearing Shurpanaka as bad. She might have done bad deeds. So there is, so the basic philosophy where the traditional Hinduism flourished is it is all about karma, bad karma, and good karma. There are no good people or bad people, right? So Shurpanaka's the moment you start seeing it from Shurpana's perspective, she doesn't appear to be bad. It's a very, what do you call, the later day medieval concept to brand people as good and bad. The ancient epic, it's not like that. It is not a story of good versus evil. It's more like a story of your action and the fruits of your action, karma and karma bala. So every story can be told from various perspectives, and that's what ancient Indians used to do before the Bhakti era and other things changed it. It was during the Bhakti era, devotional era, that one side became totally bad and the other side became totally white, painted white and justified. The original Ramayana or Mahabharata doesn't justify anyone. Everyone's action is good and everyone's fruit of that action is good. So in Ramayana, how it comes is Shurpanaka's nose was cut and hence Shurpanaka tried to attack Sita. So that is her karma and she was punished. So that is, she ate the fruits of that action. But the one who punished her, Ram, Lakshman, and Sita, they also paid the price. They also ate the fruits of their action because one action led to another. Sita was kidnapped, they suffered, everybody suffered. So it is about the chain reaction of life, of one's action and its reaction that Ramayana and Mahabharata talks about. So I just took it back to the original point of view rather than painting it in a very the medieval era's, perhaps I may call juvenile or a fairy tale way of good versus bad, and one side is bad and demon and other things. It was never the intention of the original writers to paint it like that. That's a very alien concept for Indian, the good and the bad concept. It is always about good deeds and bad deeds, and every deed will be rewarded.
But
And
still, in our education system, whenever somebody's dadi is telling the stories to their grandchildren, uh, they
see,
also.
Ramayana told in every part of the country is different.
Okay.
If I may say, basically, this is a very this concept of totally considering the asuras or others is a very medieval concept, and it is more restricted towards the Gangetic belt rather than the northern belt of India, rather than the other parts of the country where the classical Ramayana still exists. So we never grew up hearing that all of them as evil or anything like that. We grew up hearing all both sides, and our dadis used to talk about the action and reaction concept. So it's not the same across the country. It depends on from which part of the country, what is the historical reasons of being influenced by certain stories, how the stories evolve. There are hundreds of Ramayanas. All Ramayanas are not the same, and it's not the same story every story. So my writing is trying to bring it back to the original pre Bhakti era version. So that is why it appears so.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. And my question is to you, Tarana ma'am. Being a historian, was it easy to write about historical events? Could you please share your journey while penning down the Begum and the...
So, with historical fiction, we are kind of traversing a path where we are coming from history, but we are leaning close to public engagement. That is, we want this history to be told to the people, and we want to, because what I feel is that about only 1% are the facts, and 99% of the history wasn't written. So with Begum and the Dastan, I'm trying to come with my character, who was a real character. But then women, like Neelakantan sir said, that women are always depicted as good or bad, like evil or, like that. Maybe men also. But unfortunately for women, they just fall off the pages of history in the larger movement of politics. So here I'm focusing on one woman who actually suffered through a different time in history, and this she wasn't really written about, but she lived in oral history. It almost became like a myth. Like, here is this woman, and these are the things that happened to her, and how she very courageously fought back by her own actions. So I wanted to portray this with the Begum and the Dastan. And it's the story of the Begum who was in fact kidnapped by the Nawab and forced into the harem. So how did she understand the life in the harem? And we have certain facts of her life that are documented. What happens in between? What did she think? How did she live her days? Did she try to compromise with her life? Or how she felt that, no, I will not bend down. A wrong has been done to me. She was abandoned by her family. So she did feel that a wrong was done to her. So my journey was about understanding this woman, understanding how she lived within that sweep of history, and the facts of her life is number one, the part that a historian comes to play. But then I am also a storyteller. So on a day-to-day basis, what was her life like? What did she think? So I'm engaging with characters. I'm engaging with real life characters who should not be my voices. Like Changez sir said, that you have to be neutral. You can't say she was good or she was bad. Yes, people have written about her. They've said that she wanted to be a begum, so she manipulated. On the other hand, other people say, no, she was forced into the harem. So you have to be neutral. You have to look at the facts. And so my journey took me through written histories, wherever little bits of history that I could find about this begum, and oral history, meeting people who had heard about her, or what did oral history say about her, and also the place where it was set, because it was important. I feel it is important when you are writing historical fiction to engage all your five senses. You should know what the place looked like, what did it smell like, what were the sounds of the time, and you have to live in that place to be able to write it. And so with the Begum and the Dastan, I tried to live in that era and tried to make it so palpable that the reader feels transported. I think that's what the storyteller does. And so my journey through researching about the Begum and the Dastan, through writing about it, took me physically through the places that she lived in, took me to the people whom she or the descendants of the people whom she associated with, as well as took me to places like the regional archives where I looked around to find. And also, like the panelists agree that we have to have characters which are not completely negative. It should be a well-rounded character. So the Nawab wasn't all bad. The Nawab was doing bad things, but that doesn't make him a bad person. So I want my readers also to feel that, yes, this was a Nawab and he had these positive aspects. He also had a negative aspect. right? It is karma. Maybe it is the circumstances. Maybe it was his karma and the circumstances. So maybe in most of the stories we have actions and how life plays out with these actions. And history definitely is something that we interpret with our understanding of history. And I've done it through my characters. I'm trying to understand how things were at that time and trying to explore these characters without knowing them as such. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Okay, so my second question to all of you are how do you differentiate between historical fiction and mythological fiction? Does mythology relate to history? I'm going to start with you, Anand sir.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, and it need not be. History is a lie agreed upon. Mythology, everybody knows it's a myth. People may claim it is a history. It doesn't matter. It could be proto-history. There could be elements of, because no myth develops without some element of kernel of history in it, but a lot of additions to that. I don't think calling something history, I'm not talking about historical fiction, calling something history gives it any kind of authenticity, because history itself is written mostly by the victors, and this is an opinion agreed upon by many people. So one when I'm writing the fiction based on the Puranas, I can interpret it in different ways and try to understand more about life. That is what you are trying to. I'm not concerned about which date, who killed who, and who ruled where. It doesn't matter. They might have been alive. They might have been toxic, fictitious character. It doesn't matter. Why do we read fiction? Any fiction we read for to know more about life, to understand life, to relive the different lives of others which we are not able to do in day-to-day life. The mythological fiction gives, I don't know whether it's the correct term, this kind of divisions, but mythological fiction gives you more freedom to explore that. Because if you see some of our tales like Mahabharata, there is nothing which is not mentioned in it. I'm not talking it in the typical WhatsApp university sense that atom bomb is there and this and that. When the claim is that there is nothing which is not mentioned in it, it's about the human emotion and the human traits. It covers the entire thing because it's such a huge epic with thousands of characters. And it can be considered as a religious epic, it can be considered as a historical fiction, it can be considered as fantasy, it can be considered 100 different things. It doesn't change its name. It's such a huge, vast universe where we can dip and bring out more and more things, more and more pearls out of it, either Ramayana or Mahabharata, and it belongs to the humanity. So it gives me a lot of freedom to write mythological fiction rather than the historical fiction where there are vested interests in historical fiction. So there are schools of history. There are certain certain schools and universities and colleges where certain viewpoint dominates and which keeps changing on who holds the power. The mythology doesn't have that issue. So if I am exploring the truth, if I am exploring about life, it gives me more freedom to write about mythology rather than about historical characters. Not that I won't write about it, but I like to delve more into mythological fiction. But mythology is not history. It is beyond that. It has much more deeper significance. I will conclude this with only one word. We may not remember many events in history. Even people who study up to the post-graduation level of history won't remember even 30% of it or 20% of it because they studied for the exam. And it doesn't. How does it matter which war who won 300 years ago or 500 years ago? But even an illiterate person will find something relevant, some solace, some relevance in mythology. So for humanity is concerned, the myths, the mythology, the folk tales play a bigger role than actual history, which is only an academic exercise for historians.
Okay, so history has a certain kind of restriction, unlike mythology.
History is an academic subject. It's for a niche. Mythology is for everyone.
Okay.
Why should I care in Battle of Plassey, who, at least for now, Battle of Plassey, whoever won, it doesn't matter for me. But any myth, my local myth, that myth in my village, the folktale in my village, I grow up with, it teaches a lot about my life I'm living and about how I will interact in my life with people. It teaches me values and other things. So for me, that is important, and it doesn't matter whether I am a scholar or not. It affects me much more deeply. A lot of historical facts. It doesn't. I don't care who ruled Greece 2,500 years back. As an academic exercise to satiate my curiosity, I may just go through it. But compared to other sciences, history is past. It is done with. Yes, okay. There will be some repercussion of some events, distant event, but I don't deny that some repercussion will be there. Like the Vasco da Gama coming to India and the colonization has a repercussion. I don't deny that. This will have repercussions. But comparatively, it doesn't affect us as much as the fairy tales, the myths, the stories which people grow up with, how it affects the character of the people, the value of the society, the system. The history doesn't affect that much. So for me, mythology is deeper, and that is why writing fiction on mythology gives me more freedom, less restriction, and it gives me a tool to delve more deeper into the human mind and psyche.
Okay, thank you, sir. Changez sir, do you agree with what sir is saying? And what do you want to say?
So I wouldn't agree 100% because I appreciate mythology. And I agree with something of what Neelakantan sir said. So one thing which I agree with him, for example, earlier when he was saying that in Ramayana there was no good, there's no bad. In Mahabharata there's no good, no bad. I think he's correct in the sense that in when these books were written, even if you look at the mythology of Greece, so two books from the Greeks, Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, there's also no good and bad in that. Everyone's character is told. And I think what I like about mythology is that it's a lot of people who have good qualities and bad qualities. And the story comes about because sometimes the bad qualities of that person overcome the good qualities. It's always a struggle within the person. Now, the similarity between mythology and history is even history comes about because there are people who have good and bad struggles inside them. And I think what's important is the theme which comes out. It's important to read history because you can learn from it, and then you can also try to avoid, the mistakes that people have made in the past. I agree that dates and the names of battles and all are not very important, but the general theme of history, I think, is very, very important. And the theme in history or the story in history is very similar to the theme or story that comes in mythology. And my own belief is that, at one time, it was something happened that became a legend. The legend became a myth. So there might be some history behind the myth also. So I feel the two are very, very interconnected. So that's why I cannot disown mythology. I feel that mythology at one time started, because they were probably people on whom the stories are based, and it became. But what's important about mythology is the theme and the lesson and the story that it's trying to tell. And I think a lot of people miss out on that, and it ends up becoming very black and white, that it's good versus evil, it's bad. It's not good versus evil. It's always good qualities and bad qualities within the same person, which overcome. So I also, those villains in these mythological epics, you always see the struggle within them, and you know that the bad qualities will overcome the good qualities, but you enjoy, you watch that struggle, and sometimes you can recognize it also within yourself. So I think maybe so I mean, I kind of agree with Neelakantan sir, but I feel that history also is very, very important, mythology is very important, and sometimes they're both intertwined. So
Thank you so much, sir. I completely agree with what you're saying, that there's no good and there's no evil. It just, I mean, a human being has every aspect of good and evil within themselves. So that is absolutely true. And what do you want to say, Tarana ma'am?
So I believe that both history and mythology are a positive constant in our lives, and they are both in open to interpretations, because aside from certain very firm historical facts, what is left in our hands is just really bits of history through written records or some oral history. As far as myths are concerned, they would definitely be rooted in some sort of oral history, some kernel of facts, definitely. And they are a reflection of social, cultural, and the human aspect of the march of history of the time. And so, therefore, they are extremely important when we are looking at historical facts. When we are looking at historical fiction, yes, again, I would put in my interpretation of the events. I would, for example, writing from now, as a woman of the 21st century, I feel extremely angry with what happened to my character. But remember, this character belonged to the last century. What happened to her was in the late 1890s. So things were absolutely different. I am interpreting history. So every history would have an interpretation as well, aside from the basic facts. Therefore, writing historical fiction will be based on interpretations of characters, of events. Perhaps I don't try to wear the lens of a modern woman while doing that. I try my best not to do that, because you need to be neutral when you are telling that story. Mythology is extremely important because it reflects how people thought at that time. And like Neelakantan sir said, that Supanka or Ravan might be negative characters up here in the north, but they were not. I don't think everybody had their own. The beauty of Indian mythology is that every character has his own, history, and how he acts depends on that. So Ravana also had certain impetus in his actions. He did negative things, but he also had positive aspects. That's the beauty of Indian mythology. And indeed, most of the mythology, why do they affect us even today, like Greek mythology, as Chingis sir was saying? Because we respond to the humanity. People are the same. The feelings, the thoughts might change, but the feeling, we can feel for those characters. We can feel for those mythological characters. Therefore, in my book, I have a stream that is based on the dastan. Now, dastan is like pure mythology. It's like pure storytelling by a person in in the and the dastan sessions were a normal cultural aspect, and were an interpretation of what was going on. So the Dastan Go is telling the same story to the people, because he is trying to project history as it is happening and telling the people that this is what is happening around you. In the same way, the storyteller, whether he is writing of mythology or he is writing about historical fiction, would be talking to the people in direct conversation, because we are informed by historical happenings all the time. Why are we here in this place is because of certain historical happenings, isn't it? Why are we in India? Why did the movement of history that brought our forefathers here, or whatever? But we are all rooted in history. That's what I feel very strongly. And when we are writing history, yes, we try to deal with the facts. I'm not talking about historical fiction. Like Chingis sir wrote history, so he dealt with important facts. But you can't be 100% sure of certain elements. You would have some elements which you are not unsure of, which you are unsure of, and that doesn't become history. So pure historian would not write about them, but a historical fiction person would be writing about them like I do. And so I'm in between history and the storyteller, a historian and a storyteller, sensibility of a storyteller and the facts of a historian. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So my next question would be, what is the best way to start researching mythological history and historical fiction stories? Could you suggest something? I'll start with you, Changez sir.
I'm not really an expert on mythology. I thought that would be a bit more appropriate for Neelakantan Saab. For me, my interest is basically in history and mythology, which people hardly know about. So, for example, like the part of the world which I'm from, I come from Peshawar in the northwest of Pakistan. The history here is hardly written, and we have a lot of mythology over here, which is also quite ignored. So, for example, uh, my mother's village is at a place in Sawabi. It's called Panchpir. Now, there's two stories. Panchpir, the Muslims say that Panchpir basically were five saints who basically came and settled in this village. That's why it's named such. But the Hindus believe that Panchpir was the place where the Pandav brothers came, during the story of the Mahabharata. And this is when they were, had to leave Hastinapur, so they were over here. So there's a lot of, so this is of something of interest to me, something which hardly anyone knows about, and I think this is something worth writing about. So for me, I would always go for something which no one knows anything about. So we know, but like, for example, like Neelakantan Saab is writing from a different angle. You have the Ramayana in which you have a hero and you have the villain, but now he's writing from the other point of view also, which I think is a good aspect to write something different. Because if you keep telling the same story again and again and again, you're actually boring the writer. You're boring the reader then also as well. So I always feel it's important to write from a different angle or on a topic that's not been touched ever.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. And Tarana ma'am.
When I begin writing, whether it is historical fiction or history as such, one would always begin with what do we know? What are the hard historical facts? That is the time you do a hard-nosed historian's research into things and look for sources. But as Changez sir said, there's a lot of oral history that we need to work on, because everything is not there in black and white for you. Where, like, the Indian independence is a historical fact, but look at how people were displaced through partition. What happened to that? How did this creating of borders happen? So many things that are there in written history, but there's so many interpretations, so much of oral history that one needs to sieve through. So I would first begin with the hard facts. I would go to the places. The second part is that I talked about, since I'm writing about it, I need to feel the era. I need to feel the place and the era with what I'm writing about. It can be through reading about that era. It can be physically or actually all of that, actually physically staying in that place. Like, I just sat down in the Zanana area, and I just sat and I thought, what did it feel like staying here? What did the evening feel like, 100 years ago? How did it feel to be in this closed space where there are walls and where you can just see the darbar, looking at across all those walls? So feeling that as well. Also, talk immersive experience. Yeah, as a writer, you need to have that immersive experience. Even when you're writing mythology, or when I was writing about the dastan, that immersive experience of being in that place, that sensory experience would be the second part. And then carrying on with gathering of sources, then come to oral history, gathering of oral history, talking to people who have lived through or who have heard the intergenerational stories. It goes with mythology also. It is the intergenerational interpretation of the myth, or the kernel of, and finding that kernel of fact, exactly the same what you do with the myths, finding that kernel of fact that prompted that idea. Why were the asuras called asuras? Or were they all bad people? What was the history behind this branding of us. That's a reflection of the socio-historical, cultural aspect of mythology as well. So that would be another very important aspect. And then finally, as a historical fiction writer, you need to create your character. You need to travel the story with that character, not knowing that character. The character will always surprise you. The character should not be a reflection of yourself. You should be puzzling through what he did and why did he do this, right? So these are the various ways in which you approach the research, and finally then you sit down to write it, and by that time hopefully you're totally up to your neck with that era and with that whole atmosphere, and it should just flow out of you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And Anand, sir, what do you want to say on that?
No, more or less they are covered. Both the professors have covered it. But for me, it is more of hearing, since I don't deal with pure history where I have to give citations and other things, but rather with storytelling. For me, it is more about collecting folk tales because most of my stories are rooted in folk tales and oral narratives and performing arts, especially in the south and eastern part of the country, in the rural areas. There are a lot of performing, living theaters and performing arts, and a lot of oral storytelling traditions. Most of these are subaltern in nature. They have grown as a countertelling of the typical Sanskrit written narration. So this you can, so like there are temples for Duryodhana, there are temples for Ravan, there are temples for Shakuni uh, across India. There is a temple in Himachal Pradesh for Duryodhana, there are a few in Kerala, one big temple in Kerala for Duryodhana, there are temples for Ravan, and all these have myths and stories associated with it. Similarly, for various characters in Puranas, whether they are from the side which won or the side which lost, they all have become gods, the rural gods. And they have their own temples, their own myths, their own stories, their own devotees associated with that. And uh, Hinduism is a agglomeration of so many beliefs. It's not one belief or one book and one god or anything. It's agglomeration of so many beliefs, right from starting the belief in formless single god like Islam or the original Christianity, to believing in multiple gods, to believing that multiple forms of gods are one and one. There's different aspects of one, to not believing in God at all, to an agnostic stand of perhaps there is God or perhaps it isn't, I don't know. All these form a part and parcel of the Hindu tradition, which is an agglomeration of different beliefs and culture. And because of this nature, it has so many tales and so many versions, which may sometimes complement, sometimes they are contradictory, but it's a fascinating world. So my research and my inspiration is basically from this kind of subaltern narratives and traditions, which are existing for thousands of years in India and across Asia, I must say. The myths, the legends, like Sir was telling, Changez Sir was telling about Pandavas, they had lived there. The same Pandavas, we can find the myth in Assam, we can find the myth in Darba, we can find the same myth in Sri Lanka, we can find the same myth in Kerala, we can find the same myth in Gujarat, spread over thousands or 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 kilometers away at different parts of the geography of the country. The same myth prevailing. Like Hanuman has been born in at least 5 or 6 places. Different places claim that Hanuman was born there. Jadayu fell in at least 5 places, if I counted correctly, could be more. Each place has a temple, each place has a myth, each place has a story for that. Each place has its own set of believers and its own version of the story. So it's such a fascinating world. So my research comes from trying to identify this. I might not have even covered 1% of what is available, but that itself will take a lifetime.
Thank you so much, sir. So lastly, What advice would you wish to share with us aspiring mythological history and historical fiction writers out there?
I
And
will say, I will say, keep your eyes open, keep your perspectives open. Don't close your perspective. Don't judge any side, and try to get into the character. Even if it is pure history, it is because I believe ultimately there is no difference between people. The difference in the race, language, religion, these are all peripheral ones. Of course, your thought process will be changed because of historical accidents, historical reasons, perhaps the cultural and climate may play some effect. Even the climate and weather will play an effect on how a religion evolves and how a religion uh, mutate or change. Uh, it is a dynamic process, but all the same, the human basic emotions remains the same. Whether you are a European or an Arab or an African or an Indian, whether you are a male or a female, it doesn't matter. Some of the fundamental emotions remain, and there is a reason for every action. Even random actions for which we might not immediately see any reason, there is a reason. As storytellers, our dharma or duty is to go in search of that. The moment you do that, if you are able to achieve something of it, you will have a fantastic story or history.
thank you, sir. And Changez, sir, what advice would you like to give?
So I think what I said earlier is very important to respect the reader. Don't think that your reader is someone stupid who needs to be told what to do. I think it's very important that you give them the facts and the figures and try to let them come up with their own conclusions. And for that to happen, I think every writer has to go into the story with an open mind. Don't start writing something knowing from before how it will end. So a lot of times when I'm writing a chapter or a section, I change everything because I assume something's happening, but when things are evolving, you find something completely different. You're looking for one thing, but you find 10 different things. So it's very important to go with an open mind, and it may not be relevant to the story. You may end up finding a completely different story that you want to write about someday. But I think having an open mind and respecting, I think this goes back to what Neelakantan Saab said. That everyone at basically is the same. They have the same aspirations, whether you're from the west or from the east. So I think that respect should be there, and go in with and you'll be surprised how much the reader will also respect your point of view and your opinion also.
Thank you, sir. And lastly, Tarana ma'am, what advice would you like to give?
I think this is a wonderful panel because we have mythology and we have pure history and we have historical fiction in between. So I would agree with the point of Changez sir about historical neutrality. It is extremely important that we have to be historically neutral and we should not let our current sensibilities dictate the characters. So our characters should not be people dressed up in medieval dresses and mouthing our lines or having our thoughts. That is extremely important. At the same time, I definitely agree with Neelakantan sir that it is human. It's the basic humanism of whether it is mythology or history. They are human beings. They have their aspirations, their hopes, the grief, the reaction is same whether it is history or mythology. When we are writing about whether history, mythology, or historical fiction, we have to emphasize in the humanness of everything. And then reaching out to people with this idea of corresponding to their sensibilities is what is my biggest advice. And one more advice is do not hurt anybody with the way you are writing, whether it is mythology or history. For that very reason, right at the end of my of submitting the final draft, I decided to change the names because I through my book had a very strong historical research base. That being said, I did not want to hurt anybody. I did not want to hurt the descendants of the characters because they are all real characters. I didn't want to. So that kind of a sensitivity as a writer should always prevail, whether you are writing mythology, history, or historical fiction. That is my that is what my advice would be. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for taking your precious time out to take part in this session. I hope the audience enjoyed, and I hope that you have also enjoyed this session. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you very
having.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.